A very good evening to one and all present here. I am Shreya Jha, your host for today's webinar. I welcome you all to this session scheduled today. I welcome our guest speaker, Advocate Sushant Samudrala. Thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation and joining us today for enlightening the budding lawyers and young mind connected with us today. Advocate Sai Sushant is a cyber law expert and techno-legal consultant. He is the CEO of Sushant IT Law Associates. He is an academician, author, corporate trainer, and legal mentor. He has spoken in 900 plus conferences and has addressed 145 plus webinars during the pandemic. He has published various articles in international and national conferences. He has received many awards and accolades and has recently been awarded as Best Cyber Lawyer of the Year 2020 by Indian Legal. Once again, I welcome you, sir. I request all our participants to keep their videos and mic off throughout the webinar. You can put up your questions and queries in the chat box, which will be answered at the end of this session by our guest speaker. Or you may raise your hand in the question and answer session. We'll unmute you thereafter and you may ask your query directly from sir. Without wasting much time, let's start this webinar now. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. A very good evening to all the participants who are part of this webinar. And once again, like to thank the organizers for giving me this wonderful opportunity. And I believe that this is going to be the need of the hour because given the present circumstances, I don't think there's anybody here without a smartphone and without using applications like Facebook, WhatsApp here. So that being the situation, I think COVID-19 has accelerated the digital life altogether. And then there are a lot of people now joining the digital bandwagon, if not already. So I think in this context, I believe that cyber law is going to be playing a very, very critical and crucial role in yours and my life, professionally, personally, as well as otherwise. So I just wanted to highlight few key trends of 2021 from a cyber legal perspective. So I thought I'll just take you through a short journey of some new and interesting challenges. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. This is the usual response I evoke when I'm taking a session, that too on a Sunday evening when almost everybody is hooked up to entertainment rather than focusing on education. I believe, since I'm not able to see all of your faces here, I think most of your expressions will be something like this. But let me hope that I can change your expressions as we go forward. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So I believe that we are all digital slaves. The reason is that whenever you look at the master and slave relationship, it's the slave who actually puts in a lot of effort, and ultimately the benefit is reaped by the master. Given the situation, I think all of us who are actually trying to use applications like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and also these over-the-top applications like WhatsApp are actually left, right, and center creating content from morning to evening. And it is these companies who are actually getting benefited out of the content generated by us. In that context, I thought we're all digital slaves because the valuation of these companies is increasing on a daily basis, given the kind of user base and the kind of content that gets generated on these platforms per se. Can we move to the next slide? Yeah, I thought I should first start off by saying that the government of India has quietly notified certain guidelines, which are called the OTT and social media guidelines 2021, which broadly brings in the concept of intermediaries, social media intermediaries, significant social media intermediaries, and also brings in the concept of grievance mechanisms at various levels. More significantly, the onus is now being back that any social media intermediary who's part of this particular definition would be required now to appoint a nodal officer who's actually belonging to Indian origin. So what does it say? It says that broadly speaking, whatever be your kind of application, wherever you may be geographically located, the moment you get classified under the social media intermediary definition, and the significant social media intermediary definition, you will now have to quietly exercise your due diligence and legal compliance to these guidelines which are notified. Of course, these guidelines are just a mere paper tiger. The reason is that they have a self-regulatory mechanism and they do not primarily focus upon the kind of liabilities for non-compliance. But that being so, they're actually supposed to be read along with IT Act and IT Rules 2011, which formulate some kind of liability for non-compliance. So this is a very interesting development, shall I say, in terms of coming up with at least certain guidelines which otherwise were not available to actually handle these kinds of institutions per se. I believe OTT platforms today have become the new playgrounds for all kinds of activities because when I was looking at one of the statistics, it was just trying to tell me that Netflix and Apple TV were two vulnerable areas which are now being the favorite targets of cyber criminals per se. So that being so, I think OTT is a different kind of a platform altogether, and they would require distinctive guidelines in order to look at the way how we can try to go ahead and bring them under the ambit of law per se. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. All along, we thought that cybersecurity is something which is purely technical in nature. And when in the year 2000, when India introduced the Information Technology Act on October 17th, 2000, the purpose and objective was very clear. It was a legislation which was actually designed to actually provide a legal recognition to all electronic transactions, as also give boost to electronic commerce and electronic governance per se. In those days, cybersecurity hadn't actually arrived. It was just somewhere on the horizon. But by the time the IT Act was amended in 2008, cybersecurity slowly started to be coming on the cards. And by the time it's 2011, when the IT rules were notified, cybersecurity had actually been becoming the hot topic in the industry. And today, it's now already arrived. And all along, we've been paying lip service to cybersecurity. And now we'll have to quickly realize that cybersecurity, apart from just being a technical aspect, also brings in huge concepts of techno-legal considerations. So what does it mean? It means very simple that cybersecurity legal regime is now becoming the need of the hour. Now, countries are actually trying to come up with their own distinctive cybersecurity laws. When you look at what's happening around the world, Vietnam has now come up with a cybersecurity law, which has a totally different concept altogether, wherein it has tried to come up with a concept of the entire cyberspace being governed under its own national boundary per se. So when you look at this, the paradigm is entirely different. Now, likewise, in the absence of an international convention or international treaty on cybersecurity law, a lot of countries are coming up with their own cybersecurity laws. The United States has recently come up with a new legislation called the Cybersecurity Improvement Act. I think in this kind of a scenario, the kind of roles and responsibilities of various stakeholders with regard to cybersecurity legal jurisprudence has to be clearly defined, and the kind of standards would have to be clearly specified. So, therefore, in a situation like this, when I'm trying to analyze what is the position of India in cybersecurity law, I can just tell you that we have just added one provision of what's called cybersecurity when we amended the IT Act in 2008. So the definition under Section 2NB of the IT Act defines cybersecurity. And just to give you a broad glimpse of the definition, it just protects not just the data or information residing in a device, but also the physical security of the device also has to be protected to ensure that there is no unauthorized access, disclosure, and also destruction per se. So that's the broad definition. But I believe you cannot just get away by giving one simple definition of cybersecurity in the cyber law. And I believe that cyber law and cybersecurity are intertwining disciplines, and they will have to be ensuring that some work with regard to cybersecurity law also has to be considered. I believe this is also going to be one of the key trends, as I can see, with more and more devices getting connected on the internet, and now with work from home and online learning and online business. I think it's a completely different kind of a paradigm. It's now required that we come up with some kind of legislative framework with regard to cyber security in the country. Next. So I just want to tell you that Indian government has gone ahead and actually exercised its power under Section 69 of the IT Act, which goes on to give uh, unlimited power to the central government to block, intercept, and actually monitor any kinds of communications across any kinds of platforms with a limited purpose in case it is causing threat to the sovereignty and integrity of the country, to protect the national security for defense reasons, in order to maintain a public order and ensure that there are no communal disharmonies happening. So the government recently has gone ahead and blocked certain kinds of Chinese apps, and then this was done majorly in order to ensure that there is no breach of privacy of Indian citizens' data. Well, of course, we have woken up late, but I think it's a very good move that the Indian government has actually now finally woken up out of its deep slumber. Next. Apart from banning these apps, the cloned versions of these apps also were made available. Well, one of the very big advantages that today technology provides is if you block a particular website or an application, immediately you see the clones cropping up in and around the app stores. The reason is they want to create some kind of revenue and then generate some kind of a revenue out of these applications per se. But I can tell you that this can be considered as a second digital strike by our nation against banning even the cloned versions of these Chinese applications. Next. Now, one statistics, as you're able to see on the screen, says 7 out of 10 Indian companies saw increase in cyber attacks while working from home and in this lockdown. Well, work from home paradigm has raised new kinds of cyber law and cyber legal issues per se. I, as a cyber lawyer, have been getting a lot of different kinds of variety of cases pertaining to cyber security and data breaches happening during the period of work from home per se. So I think the message is very clear that cyber law and cyber security will have to be constantly adopted by everyone, irrespective of whether they're lawyers or legal professionals per se. I think the basic understanding and due diligence would have to be understood by every person who's actually making use of these devices and also the internet per se. Next. Now, it's not just one sector, but the power grids also had been brought under the ambit of cyber attacks. Recently, we've seen the Mumbai's blackout, which actually was a result of a cyber attack. And the state of Telangana also faced these kinds of threats, but fortunately, they were able to at least prevent them to a certain extent. We don't know what's written in the future, but as of today, I think these are some illustrations to tell you that even power grids are now being brought under the ambit of cyber law and cyber attacks. Next. Now, in 2020, there was a kind of a statistics which said every 14 seconds there's going to be a cyber attack. Well, in 2021, today, the time frame has got reduced to 11 seconds per se. So I think every 11 seconds, there's some or the other kind of a cyber attack that's happening somewhere on the world. I think that's something that we need to clearly understand that cyber law will, as a discipline, will be playing a very, very critical role, not just in India, but I think across the globe. Next. There's definitely a
Excuse me, sir.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir, you're audible now.
Yeah, thank you. So the NHAI, the National Highway Authorities of India, also reported a kind of cyber attack. But of course, there are no reported losses. But I think these are just early times. We'll have to just wait and look at the different kinds of scenarios. Can we move to the next slide, please? Now, the IT services giant Cognizant was also hit with a cyber attack, which is specifically called Maze ransomware. Now, my dear friends, want to tell you that ransomware has become the new jewel in the crown during this period of COVID-19. Now, earlier we just thought that ransom was very specific only to physical crimes. But just imagine you wake up and then you get a message on your device, whether it's your laptop or mobile phone or tablet, that you somebody has got access to the control and control over the said device, and unless you pay a certain amount of money as ransom, they will not be able to release the access. So I think these attacks usually involve cryptocurrency. I'll also be talking about cryptocurrency, but just to tell you that bitcoins is also one form of popular cryptocurrency, and these ransomware attacks usually bring in the concept of cryptocurrency as ransom. So I think we'll all have to be very, very careful of these kind of scenarios. And these are now being targeting not just corporate companies, but also individuals per se. Next. Now, India Bulls, which is into the financial operations, also was hit with the ransomware attack. I just thought I should just give you a broad glimpse on the different kinds of sectors that have been hit with cyber attacks, just to make you understand that the kind of reach that cyber law has now been more broad thanks to COVID-19. Next. Now, Honda, which is an automobile company, also was hit with a cyber attack. So much so that it has to actually stop its production, and the entire production was brought to a grinding halt. So I think it's not just the IT companies, but also the automobile sector is now broadly hit with cyber attacks. Next. Ashirwad, which is a famous brand, also tried to condemn cyber attack, but there was a lot of rumor that on the internet that they actually were hit with a cyber attack. I think these cyber attacks are on the galore. Next. Now, the Zec Hospital, which is considered to be one of the biggest COVID-19 testing laboratories in the world, also was hit with a cyber attack. Wow. I think today we're able to see a different concept known as vaccine cyber nationalism. I shall come to that as we discuss forward. But just to tell you that, yes, a lot of cyber attacks are also being targeted with regard to the COVID-19 testing laboratories. Next. EasyJet also made a statement that it had been hit with a hack attack, and where it claims that more than 9 million customers' data was actually lost as a result of the hack attack. Now, it's not just the other companies, but even airlines are now being targeted by cyber attacks. Next. Now, we'll have to quickly understand that even law firms are facing cyber attacks. Now, this instance tells us that famous law firms were hit with a cyber attack where they consisted, where they actually possessed rather the confidential information and sensitive information of celebrity clients. So, given this paradigm, I think cybersecurity for the legal fraternity is also now going to be the paramount as we go forward, given this position. Next. Now, data protection law becomes one of the key trends of cyber law, given the fact that there is going to be a lot of electronic and personal and sensitive data that's going to be generated, transmitted, shared across different verticals. In this kind of a scenario, I believe that we are all awaiting the personal data protection bill, and we are hoping that this will get passed in this year of 2021. because India does not have a dedicated data protection law as I'm talking to you this evening. Of course, we have a small regime under Section 43A, right along with 72A and IT Rules 2011. But of course, there are going to be lots of challenges there also. But just to tell you that personal data protection bill is likely to be bringing in some kinds of data protection obligations upon the intermediaries in order to exercise their due diligence in protecting personal data. Next. Artificial intelligence has already begun. Now we are in the age of AI, and I don't see any vertical that is not using AI today, be it finance, be it health sector, be it even a search engine. I believe all of us have already become part of the AI revolution. The reason is the moment we're using search engines like Google, automatically we are making use of artificial intelligence. Now it's mostly going to be the data-driven technology, but the kind of cyber legalities that artificial intelligence is likely to bring in will be huge and humongous given the adoption of AI in all verticals. Apart from that, facial recognition has also become the new kind of phenomena, and a lot of organizations are trying to make use of facial recognition for the purpose of actually tracking down the attendance of their employees during this COVID-19, as also face has become the new passport of the times. Given this scenario, the legal policy regulatory frameworks relating to facial recognition with the help of AI has already been recognized, because a lot of airports have now begun testing facial recognition as a mode of authentication. So given this fact, I think the cyber legal aspects of facial recognition also can be seen as a growing trend per se. Next. Blockchain has already become the ground reality. A lot of organizations and state and non-state actors are doing a lot of experiments with the help of blockchain. Well, this technology is a path-breaking technology, and it brings in the concept of a distributed ledger. So let me just tell you in a nutshell what's blockchain. Considering this webinar to be a blockchain, okay, let us try to understand the concept in a nutshell. The organizers of this webinar, let us consider them as a blockchain service providers. So what do? They've connected all of us through this tool, and whoever are part of these particular webinar, including you and me, are all blocks who are connected with the chain. And the chain is nothing but this tool, which is Microsoft Teams per se. Now just imagine if you have to enter into this particular webinar, you will have to actually use the link provided by the organizers, do a sign up, and then you have to get inside. So therefore, consider that to be the kind of authentication that this webinar has. So consider all of these to be blockchain. We are all blocks, we are all connected, and we are connected because of the organizers. Now, everybody who's part of this webinar is able to see the screen, right? Now, everybody is able to see the screen, so there is transparency. But can you alter or modify the content on the screen? You cannot. So therefore, it is not per se possible to tamper the content. That is one feature. Date and time. It's having date and time persistency. So therefore, you can actually clearly come to know the date and time. Just like how the meeting has been recorded, we have the time being rolling down, and date and time also is recorded per se. So all of these are, and we also have the authentication, which is nothing but the link. Who generates the link? It is the respective organizer. So here we have our organizers who have actually generated this link. So I believe that this is a classical example of blockchain. So blockchain is also likely to bring in huge kinds of legalities, whether it's legal status, is it legal? What kind of legality is provided to the status of blockchain transactions? Is that legal? Can you rely it as evidence in a court of law? Is there a possibility of jurisdictional issues happening? I think in this way, there are going to be a large number of legalities that are going to relate to blockchain per se. But this kind of a technology is used by and large by a lot of actors, whether it's be governmental or non-governmental agencies per se. Next. Smart contracts. I think this is a very interesting scenario. Just imagine if I and you would like to enter into a contract today. We don't make use of the physical contract. and even electronically, we don't require our digital or electronic signatures. Just imagine if all the terms and conditions of a particular contract are negotiated between a machine and an individual. So the contracts which are created out of blockchain technology typically can be called a smart contract. Now, the biggest challenge is the enforceability of blockchain and the smart contracts. Of course, we have the Indian IT Act, which gives legal recognition to any electronic contract under Section 10A. So broadly, this is also covered. But there's also going to be enforcement challenges with regard to the fact that all these electronic contracts will be legally valid only in case you use electronic or digital signatures per se. And these have to be granted only by the certifying authority and not by anybody else. So that being if this particular organizer is not a certifying authority, then the kind of authentication that has been given by them, it may not be enforceable under the present IT Act, specifically looking at Section 35. So smart contracts also are likely to be one of the key trends of Cyber Law 2021, as I can see. Next. Cryptocurrency has also now been a hot topic of discussion, and it can bring in huge amounts of cyber legal issues on the table, given the fact that all these are virtual currency. So how will you store them? You'll have to have a wallet. Once you have a wallet, all the transactions that are created out of this cryptocurrency can be considered to be electronic records, thanks to the IT Act, Section 21T and Section 4 of the IT Act. So just to give you a small example of cryptocurrency, let me just take you through a small example. Let's consider that you go to a movie theater, and while you enter the movie theater, the theater management gives you a small piece of token, a coin, and tells you that in case you want to buy any kinds of refreshments, you can go ahead and buy the refreshments available in the theater using the respective token. So they tell you that this is worth 100 rupees, you can encash it. So what do? You go and go to the movie either before the start of the movie or during the interval. You go ahead and purchase your refreshments, whether it's popcorn, whether it's any soft drink, or whether it's anything else. So once you come out of the theater, the token that is issued by the theater owner has no value. You cannot go and purchase anything with that token. But as long as you're in the theater premises, you can go ahead and encash it in the respective refreshment store. So consider that this is a cryptocurrency per se. So out of which one of the most popular kind of cryptocurrency is Bitcoins. So we have very interesting concepts per se. I don't want to talk about all of these because it's not an exclusive session on cryptocurrency. But just to tell you that cryptocurrency, banning cryptocurrency per se may not be the right approach. Our Honorable Finance Minister also came up with a statement that they would actually like to reap the advantages. They would like to come up with certain kinds of regulations and regulatory measures in regulating cryptocurrency. A lot of countries have already begun coming up with specific legislations on cryptocurrency per se. Some countries have actually given legal tender to cryptocurrency per se for a particular kind of transactions. Blockchain and cryptocurrency have some kind of an interrelationship. Just consider that movie theater to be a blockchain. So and the token is cryptocurrency. We'll be able to relate to the same. Blockchain as a legal paradigm also is bringing in some kinds of distinct legislations. Malta has come up with a different legislation on blockchain. Vermont, Arizona, state of Delaware in the US have come up with specific provisions relating to enforceability of blockchain per se. Next. The Internet of Things has now been talked of much during this period of COVID-19. The reason is that there are hundreds of devices that are already connected on the internet, but thanks to COVID-19, I think there are now millions of devices that are getting connected to the internet. Any device that gets connected to the internet becomes Internet of Things enabled device. Be it your smart TV, your smart watch, your Fitbit, your smart refrigerator, your smart microwave, your smart home automation or office automation, your Wi-Fi printer, all of these are internet enabled devices per se. Now, once you talk about Internet of Things, one of the most significant aspects from a cyber law perspective is cyber security law. Now, countries have come up with certain kinds of legislations which go on to define the kinds of responsibilities upon the manufacturers of these IoT devices so that they comply to certain kinds of minimum basic parameters. Now, California has been a thought leader. They've come up with Californian IoT security law, which kinds of brings in some kinds of reasonable security practices and procedures. Now, UK also has come up with IoT security law. Apart from that, the recent amendment made by the United States to the US Cyber Security Improvement Act also talks about the IoT devices which have been purchased by the government and federal agencies with the federal and government agencies' monies per se. So I think this is also turning out to be one of the key trends of Cyber Law 2021, with more and more IoT based devices getting themselves used, whether it's the industrial IoT or whether it's the consumer IoT. I think it is bringing in huge amounts of discussions and deliberations with regard to their cyber legal frameworks. Next. COVID-19 per se has also been bringing in different kinds of cyber legal paradigms on the table because work from home policies are now being the ground reality, and a lot of contractual issues specifically relating to the IT sector and other kinds of sectors, including the real estate, has now been increasingly hit with COVID-19. I think COVID-19 is also seeing some kinds of electronic contracts to be disputed, and the frustration of electronic contracts can also be seen as a major result of COVID-19. This is also one of the recent trends that I can see on the horizon of Cyber Law 2021. Next. Now, I can tell you that as a practicing cyber lawyer, I believe that once we get victorious over COVID-19, we are all likely to see the new cyber world order that's likely to emerge. This cyber world order is likely to bring in huge kinds of discussions of various emerging cyber legal principles, and will be very interesting because there'll be a lot of other kinds of new areas of cyber law and cyber legal jurisprudence which we are going to witness once we get victorious against COVID-19. Next. Vaccine cyber nationalism has now turned out to be the new ground reality. The reason is that a lot of cyber attacks have been targeted to affect the supply chain of COVID-19 vaccines per se. So I believe that a lot of IP related thefts have already begun in companies and in R&D labs where these vaccines formulas are getting increasingly stolen by attackers. And apart from that, disrupting and also trying to launch some kinds of phishing attacks with regard to registration of COVID-19 vaccinations has now become the new playground for cyber criminals per se. So I can also see this as one of the most emerging cyber law trends 2021, given the fact of COVID-19 vaccination today. Next. I can tell you that we are in the new phase where, on one hand, privacy is now made the fundamental right of all of us, thanks to the latest Supreme Court judgment. While, on one hand, the states are now assuming a greater significance over the digital rights of citizens per se. We are likely to witness, and we are actually witnessing per se, increased monitoring and interception of communication by the state governments and the central government across social media platforms. We've recently seen that in Maharashtra, more than 500 cases were registered during this period of COVID-19 based on social media posts. And a lot of states are assuming greater power and assuming more significant interception and monitoring of social media for the purpose of actually trying to exercise more right over the civil liberties per se. Of course, the garb is widely going to be for the protection of the state, but to what extent that does this kind of an action of the state affect the privacy is going to be very interesting per se. Of course, no fundamental right is absolute, but can these covert activities of the states be considered as a privacy breach? Is going to be a very interesting question. So this is also one of the emerging cyber legal principle that I can foresee in this new cyber world that we're all likely to witness. Next. Cyber sovereignty has now been the new principle, and many countries, including China, have come up with different thoughts on cyber sovereignty. Now, cyber sovereignty is nothing but making cyber law applicable not just to the territorial boundaries of the country, but also to outer space, to Arctic regions, and also to deep seabeds and Antarctic regions per se. Now, when I was looking at these positions of cyber sovereignty in India, I draw a blank because we don't have any kinds of legal provisions relating to cyber sovereignty per se. Next. 3D printing has now been seeing a tremendous rise during the period of COVID-19. Just imagine you can just print any kind of an object by a 3D printer. So given this kind of a paradigm, all you require is a CAD file, which is a computer aided design file, and you require a 3D printer and the material. The moment you insert the CAD file into the 3D printer, you can exactly be able to print the replica of any particular object, and you can create a 3D printed object. Now, as you're able to see on the screen, 3D printed guns, just see what kind of issues can happen there, and just see what kind of intellectual property rights can be breached using 3D printing. But what becomes important is that there are very interesting paradigms. For example, you can have 3D printed medicines. Then you have medical law coming in. You have 3D printed food. You have 3D printed objects, houses, 3D printed buildings. I think a lot of development is happening around 3D printing, but primarily because it involves a computer aided design, I think cyber law is going to be witnessing 3D printing and cyber legalities as also one of the key trends of 2021. Next. Quantum computing has already arrived, and many companies, including IBM and Google, have already tried to come up with their 50 qubit and 20 qubit computers. And these quantum computers are likely to break all kinds of algorithms and security passwords within a couple of hours. So, given the kind of legalities of quantum computing, I think cyber legal principles will have to specifically be derived given the distinctive nature of quantum computing per se. Next. Data localization has already become the ground reality. Russia has come up with a new law, which is called data localization law, where it clearly says that in case you wish to do any kinds of business with any Russian entities, you will now be required to have all kinds of data relating to such entities within the territorial jurisdiction of Russia per se. So even data localization principles have been adopted by and large by many organizations, but per se, even the personal data protection bill is likely to examine this element of data localization. So primarily, this is also one of the key trends that I can see as 2021 progresses with regard to data localization laws. Next. Balkanization of the internet has already become a reality today thanks to the Snowden revelation, and countries are now looking at country specific internet. Well, when you are able to see the www there, it's country specific internet. We already saw that Russia has come up with some kinds of mechanisms with regard to coming up with its own distinctive RUNet project, which is trying to disconnect itself from the global internet. Now, China, Russia, they're all moving in a different direction per se. So the balkanization of internet also can be seen as one of the emerging trends of 2021 when I talk of cyber law. Next. Critical information infrastructure is also likely to be targeted by a lot of cyber attacks, and legal protection of critical information infrastructure will be on the top priorities of all kinds of cyber law and cyber legal frameworks per se. In India, we also have Section 70 of the IT Act, which provides for a protection of a new concept called a protected system. The government would have to be just declaring any system or any network as a protected system by declaring the same and publishing it on its official gazette. The moment it is publishing the same on its official gazette, the kind of protected system effect takes on. Protected system can land you in 10 years imprisonment. So I think it's time to just make use of these provisions. We already started to see the NCIAC, the National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection, but I think this is also going to assume one of a lot of significance when I talk about cyber law trends. Next. Conferencing is also likely to see a different kind of focus altogether because there's ultimately going to be, given the fact that all of these would be making use of computers, computer systems, computer networks, computer communication devices, as also data or information in the electronic format. Video conferencing also can be brought under the ambit of Indian cyber law per se. And given the fact that there's going to be a lot of data that's going to be generated electronically during this video conferencing, what about the data ownership? Who's likely to own this data? I think that's going to be a very interesting question that we'll all have to discuss as we go forward. Next. Wearable devices are also now being prone to cyber attacks and data breaches. I think one of the facts that we'll have to quickly understand is the data protection, and also bringing these devices because they're going to use information and data in the electronic format, and they're going to consist of a lot of sensitive and personal data. I think given this phenomenon, all these wearable devices also need to be distinctly protected under the ambit of Indian cyber law per se. So they're likely to bring in huge complications. For example, when you talk about jurisdiction, data breaches, and where the data is stored, who accesses the data, I think all of these questions will be very, very interesting as we discuss upon wearable devices. Next. Not just that, there's also going to be an angle of data security because given that these wearable devices are worn on human body, they can also be cyber murders that can take place in case these devices get compromised, because a lot of vital information relating to our body statistics are being made available to these external players. Next. Driverless cars have now become a reality. It's no longer going to be a fiction, but when you talk of it, Tesla has also demonstrated that driverless cars can also be seen to have some kinds of accidents per se. Now, Tesla has already begun its operations in India, in Bengaluru. I think it's going to be fabulous. Everyone's imagination was that driverless cars are hunky dory, but lo and behold, we already had the first accident that has taken place. Now, this is going to bring in huge kinds of legal policy regulatory aspects, including assessment of liability in case the said driverless car is prone to a cyber attack. Well, in India, when you look at the autonomous cars, which is the first level autonomous cars, which are driverless, not exactly driverless, but AI driven cars, MG, Morris Garages, has been one of the first thought leaders who has come up with MG Gloucester, which is supposed to be the level 1 autonomous vehicle. What's very interesting is when I went to the showroom of MG in Hyderabad, it was very fancy to look at the kind of manner in which the technology, including getting connected to the internet and voice commands and all of these, could be actually incorporated into the said vehicle. But one of the major aspects that I could see is this going to be is the insurance of the vehicle going to cover even cyber attacks? That's one interesting question that I thought I should share with all of you. And whom are you going to be making liable? Is it the person who has actually manufactured it, or the person who has technically coded it, or the person who actually made use of it. I think all these things, supply chain, will be very interesting to discuss and analyze the kinds of legal liabilities. Next. Deep fake has now become the new phenomenon, and I believe that using these deep artificial intelligence based technologies, I think deep fake can superimpose the photograph and image of anybody on anybody. So I think with this, there's going to be a big problem of creating a lot of content which is actually completely fake and which is not true per se. So, but of course, there are lots of counter applications also being developed to identify whether it's a deep fake video or it's a genuine video. But I think this is going to also bring in huge kinds of cyber legal implications, as I can see on the horizon. Next. It's fake news has become the new epitome, shall I say, with no fake news laws in India. I think left, right, and center fake news has now become the new playground for for coming up with different kinds of fake narratives per se. Now, as users of smart gadgets and smart devices, we are increasingly becoming global authors, global transmitters, and global receivers of fake news per se. But all I wish to tell you is that these fake news is now going to be broadly covered under the ambit of Section 470, 469, and 468 of the Indian Penal Code. And you could be actually facing criminal charges in case you disseminate, transmit, or actually send any kinds of fake news. So, fake apps, fake mobile recharges, fake vaccines, fake Netflix subscriptions, fake charities, fake vaccines, and COVID-19 products have now been the new face of the times. So I think the broad message is, though we don't have a dedicated fake news law, unlike Malaysia and Singapore, I think this is one provision that already now being used increasingly in order to arrest the spread of fake news. Next. Darknet is now being increasingly used both for legitimate and illegitimate activities, and both state and non-state actors are using these darknet for a variety of covert and overt purposes. Now, when you look at the kind of superficial net that we access, is entirely different. Darknet is something that's the dark side of the internet. It can be accessed only using a specific browser called Tor browser, and the attribution nexus is going to be very challenging because when you look at the legal principles, evidence is going to be playing a very critical role in actually trying to eradicate some kinds of illegal activities happening across the darknet per se. But how will you attribute the source of the said uh, said illegal activity is going to be a challenging aspect because darknet has its own sources. No information is available in the public domain, and you cannot access the darknet without using the specific browser. And there are a lot of encryption standards being followed by the darknet, followed by different organizations in the darknet per se. Next. Electronic evidence is now going to be part of almost every alternate issue that's going to happen in any field of law per se. Now, you look at any field of law, civil, criminal, family, tax, anything. I believe that if you randomly check between 1 to 5 cases, how many cases have the component of electronic evidence? I think 2 or 3 cases out of every 5 cases have the component of electronic evidence. But one of the major challenges that I can see today is prosecution of electronic evidence. Thanks to the Supreme Court judgment of Arjun Pandit Rao, where the Supreme Court went back to a famous judgment called Anwar versus Bashir, where it is trying to bring in a new kind of a paradigm. If you try to bring in a copy of an electronic evidence, for example, anything that is electronic in nature can be used as legal evidence. WhatsApp communication, Facebook message, tweet, LinkedIn post, and a video, audio. I think any of these can be considered to be as electronic evidence, even your CCTV footage. But when you look at the kind of prosecution of electronic evidence, the challenge is that how will you be able to produce the certificate? Suppose, let's say that I have a particular device and somebody sends me a message, and from where the message is sent, suppose that device can be produced in the court, there is no issue. But if I am not able to produce that particular device because it's not in my possession, I will take a screenshot or a printout of the said message and then produce that as an evidence in a court of law. Well, there is no issue. Section 65 of the Evidence Act will recognize and give some kind of admissibility to it. But what becomes challenging is I need to have Section 65B certificate incorporated along with my said evidence, failing which the Supreme Court will consider that as waste paper basket material. So the message is royal and singular. The reason is, who will be able to certify and tell me that if in case I'm relying on a WhatsApp message, who will be able to certify that during the phase of communication, the algorithms in WhatsApp were working fine? That's going to be a very challenging aspect per se. Next. Cyber resilience is now an increasingly new phenomena, because almost I can see nobody, no sector not thinking of cyber resilience. Cyber resilience is how, in case you're hit with a cyber attack, how quickly can you turn to be normalcy? I think cyber resilience plans are now becoming the new toast and flavor of the times, and they're increasingly being drafted by almost all cyber lawyers today. And then we also started advising people upon coming up with cyber resilience plans to protect their organization and their critical and sensitive personal data per se. Now, I had next. Now, when I talk about the National Cyber Security Policy 2013, it's good, but it became a mere paper tiger because it was not enforced specifically. Now, the National Cyber Security 2020 is awaited, and we'll have to ensure that it is effectively implemented. So I think implementation is something that holds the key in terms of securing cyberspace and cyber security. Next. So with this, I almost come to the end of my presentation, and given the fact that what is necessary is only what is required, of course, you can go on and on discussing on this aspect. But given the limited amount of time, and this being a course, the webinar for young and budding lawyers, I thought I shouldn't overload you with information. And I can tell you that one of the sickness that we're facing today is all Indians are undergoing a new revolution, which is called the Indian vomiting revolution. I think there's a lot of information that is vomited across the internet. So I believe that I shouldn't be doing that. So I confined myself only to these few areas, and I will be more than happy to take up any questions and then answer them. And then we can have good amount of discussions and deliberations on the subject. So thank you, organizers, once more for this wonderful opportunity. And I must tell that they were very, they demonstrated their thought leadership in kind to come up with these kinds of webinars, which are the need of the hour today. Thank you so much. It's been lovely talking to all of you this evening.
Thank you so much, sir, for enlightening our participants on such an interesting and important topic. It's the time for a question and answer round. In case you have any queries, you may clear them from our guest speaker. Sir, there's one query in the chat box. I will be reading that to you.
Please.
This is from Twinkle Jain. She says, good evening, sir. As per the policy of WhatsApp, it says user messages are end-to-end encrypted, and even WhatsApp can't see those messages and user information is safe. But WhatsApp can share our data with investigating agencies without user consent, if I'm not wrong. So in your opinion, is our data actually safe?
See, primarily what I would like to tell you is that when you look at the terms and conditions of WhatsApp, it's very clearly stating that whatever you share on WhatsApp, audio, video, image or text, becomes information in public domain. Once it becomes information in public domain, there's no question of taking any kind of consent. There is no privacy per se. They may be end-to-end encrypted, but WhatsApp has been very intelligent in not touching anything about this aspect per se. Without realizing this, we share a lot of audio, video, image, or text, which is going to be sensitive and personal on upon through WhatsApp. Anybody misuses that, you cannot legally sue WhatsApp because it's clearly stated in its terms and conditions. And before you download, you and I have accepted the terms and then gone ahead and actually started making use of WhatsApp per se. So your data on WhatsApp is absolutely not safe when you look at this particular area.
Thank you so much, sir. It was really an informative and knowledgeable session with you today. I thank our participant as well for being a patient listener. We appreciate your time and patience and will make sure that we keep serving you with all such webinars in future as well. Thank you all. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. There are some more questions. Shall we take it up?
Yes, sir. Sure, sir. So there's this another question from Vaibhav Sharma. He's saying, what about the emerging artificial intelligence?
Yes, artificial intelligence will be bringing in different paradigm because apart from because artificial intelligence primarily uses data and data sets. The more and more data you're likely to feed in, the more and more accurate the system becomes. But let me tell you of a scenario. There are two kinds of applications which artificial intelligence makes use of. One is machine learning, another is NLP, which is called natural language processing. So just imagine that you feed in some data, but the system, based on its interaction with machine learning techniques, develops and comes up with a different output altogether. Then what kind of legal consequences can turn out to be? You may not be using, you may not be the programmer of that. Even if you program, you have absolutely no control of the output that's going to be generated of such emerging artificial intelligence. So the legal framework in those areas also is very, very interesting to examine, to do research, and also to come up with some guiding principles to regulate the same. I think it's a very interesting scenario. Artificial intelligence is now being the sub-discipline also. A lot of young lawyers are now trying to take artificial intelligence law as one of their core areas of specialization because of the given adoption of AI in all verticals. I think it's a very interesting question.
Thank you, sir. There's another question from Yuvraj Singh. He says, sir, what do you think if we put some censorship on social media to burst the fake news spread?
So I think it's not a practically feasible idea because I don't think we can be able to censor the social media per se. Because the moment you censor, again, the privacy right would have to be specifically protected because freedom of speech and freedom of privacy both can be interfered in case you're trying to censor anything on the social media per se. And more so when social media companies are not located in India, it's going to bring in jurisdictional issues and territoriality issues per se.
Thank you, sir. This is last but not the least. It's from Achaya. Asked that, sir, what about the cyber harassment?
Yes, cyber harassment has now seen a threefold or a fourfold rise during this period of COVID-19 because almost everyone gets onto the digital platforms, and we are likely to witness a lot of cyber bullying, cyber stalking, cyber extortion, cyber blackmailing, cyber trespass also likely to affect people today. And I think we have certain provisions relating to these cyber harassments because we have the POSCO Act. We have also something relating to child pornography. We also have something relating to any kinds of stalking online. We have 354D provision under the IPC, which has been introduced. I think some provisions are there, but what becomes important is that the harassments are taking up different forms, but we'll have to exercise our due diligence before we actually try to make use of these platforms. Because just one classical example is that, see, to anybody who's actually having online friendship, To them, I would like to tell you that, see, we disclose. Somebody says you're beautiful, specifically, or you're looking good. We try to, especially specifically women, we immediately start getting attracted, and then we start sharing more information with them. We start establishing more connect and contact with them, even if you don't know them physically. But just imagine, why don't you apply the principles of physical world to the virtual world? Physically, when you're walking on the road, some stranger comes and says you're beautiful. Will you accept him? You'll take your piece of chappal and hit him, right? Why don't you do that in the virtual sense? See, that's what I'm trying to tell you. If these kinds of measures can be adopted, and I believe that yes, we shouldn't be disclosing too much information about ourselves. And please look at the terms and conditions and policies of these, because Facebook also has something similar where it says I can do anything with your photographs and videos that you share. I can monetize them, I can share them. I don't require your consent or anything doing the same. So therefore, please look at the terms and conditions before you play, before you do any kinds of activities online. Because without reading, without understanding the permissions that you grant on your device, I think that's going to be problematic per se.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable time. It was very informative session. I thank my participants as well of this webinar. We appreciate the time and patience, and will make sure that we keep on serving you all with such webinars in future as well. Thank you all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Stay safe from COVID-19, stay cyber secured, and also ensure that you protect your family and friends from COVID as well as from cyber attacks. Thank you. And I would just like to make this comment before I end the session today. See, don't forget that internet as a paradigm never forgets. Internet as a paradigm never sleeps. So I think if you're cautious of these two facts, I think life is going to be absolutely safe. Thank you so much.